What if I told you that when the masters fell asleep, the most exhausting part of the day began for the servants? The Victorian mansion, immersed in the silence of the night, actually resembled a complex mechanism that never stopped for a minute. While the aristocrats dreamed in their soft beds, a real battle for cleanliness and order was unfolding in the cold corridors and basements. It was an invisible war against dust, soot, and chaos, waged by people deprived of the right to a normal night's sleep. Night was the only time when dirty work could be done without being seen by the masters. Their labor was hidden behind thick curtains, but it was precisely this labor that ensured the perfect shine that Victorian England was so proud of. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn why dawn for these people was not the beginning of a new day, but a signal for even more difficult trials that destroyed their health faster than any disease. Are you ready to learn the truth about why servants feared the night more than the wrath of their masters? The most important rule of a Victorian household was that the servants had to be completely invisible to the owners of the mansion. This requirement made the night hours the only time available for the most extensive work. As soon as the last member of the family retired to their bedroom, the house came under the control of the butler and housekeeper, who initiated night mode. The servants, who had already worked a full day, did not go to rest, but only changed into their work aprons. Their task was to ensure that by the time the owners woke up, the house looked as if no one lived there, and order was maintained by magic. This task required the perfect coordination of dozens of people in low-light conditions. Lighting many candles or gas lamps was expensive, so the work was often done in dim light. This put a tremendous strain on their eyesight, forcing them to literally feel their way around to find stains on carpets or dust on furniture. Any mistake noticed in the morning sunlight was punished with a fine or immediate dismissal. The fear of losing their jobs drove the exhausted workers forward, forcing them to ignore the trembling in their hands. They moved through the corridors like shadows, trying not to creak the floorboards. A distinctive feature of this night shift was the absolute silence that had to be maintained at all costs. Moving heavy oak furniture to sweep the dust from underneath it had to be done with incredible care. The servants developed whole systems of signs and gestures to coordinate the lifting of heavy objects without a single word. If someone dropped a brush or a bucket, the sound was like a cannon shot in the sleeping house. Breaking the silence could wake the owners, which was considered one of the most serious professional sins. The psychological pressure of having to be silent and invisible was more exhausting than physical labor. A person ceased to feel like a living being, turning into a function, a silent tool. The inability to talk normally, laugh, or even sigh loudly created an atmosphere of imprisonment. Many servants recalled this nighttime as hours of profound loneliness, despite the presence of colleagues nearby. It was a time when human dignity was erased for the sake of the comfort of others. While the body demanded rest, the biological rhythms of workers were brutally disrupted by years of night shifts. Chronic sleep deprivation became a companion to everyone who joined the staff of a large estate. People slept in fits and starts, 2 or 3 hours at a time, often right at their workplaces if they had a free minute. This regime led to premature aging, nervous breakdowns, and complete apathy towards everything except orders. But there was no one to complain to because outside the gates of the mansion, there was a queue of people waiting to take their place. Night cleaning involved not only physical labor, but also working with hazardous chemicals. Caustic acids, alkalis, and homemade mixtures that corroded the skin were used to remove stains. In the dark, the risk of spilling dangerous liquids on oneself or inhaling toxic fumes increased many times over. There was often no ventilation in the rooms, and the air was filled with heavy fumes. It was a slow poison that accumulated in the lungs and blood of the workers every night. Cleaning the ceremonial halls required special attention to details that seemed insignificant during the day. Every statuette, every painting, and every book in the library had to be dusted. It was monotonous, maddening work that required thousands of repetitive movements. The maids climbed ladders to dust the chandeliers, risking falls from dizziness and fatigue. But by morning, the crystal had to sparkle, reflecting the first rays of the sun. The hardest part was the uncertainty of when the work shift would end. No one could say for sure when the work would be done, as unexpected tasks often arose. A sudden order from the butler could dash any hopes of a short sleep before the morning rise. This feeling of endless labor suppressed the will and turned people into obedient robots. They lived in a closed circle, where one task followed another without interruption. It was during these hours that the harsh hierarchy of servants, about which many books have been written, was formed. Senior servants ruthlessly exploited their juniors, shifting the dirtiest work onto them. The night shift became a school of survival, where the weak broke down and left, and the strong became hardened. It was a social drama hidden from the eyes of the owners, played out against the backdrop of luxurious interiors. We would be very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about the price of perfect order in historic mansions? Write about it in the comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of cooking in the past? At night, the kitchen and scullery of a Victorian mansion turned into a battlefield of grease and smoke. During the day, work was in full swing to prepare exquisite dishes, and at night it was time for a general cleaning. Huge cast iron stoves, which were heated with coal all day long, had to be cleaned until they shone. These culinary monsters still retain their heat, burning the hands of those who tried to scrape off burnt food. The kitchen floor was usually paved with stone slabs, which were covered with a layer of grease and dirt during the day. Sand, stiff brushes, and ice-cold water were needed to clean these stones. Servants knelt for hours, rubbing their skin against the rough surface of the stone. The use of hot water was often restricted, as it had to be saved for the morning needs of the masters. The cold and dampness penetrated the joints, causing chronic pain even at a young age. The most hated job was cleaning copper cookware, of which there was a huge amount in Victorian kitchens. Dozens of pots, jelly molds, and saucepans had to shine like gold. A mixture of salt, vinegar, and fine sand was used to clean the copper, which corroded the fingers until they bled. Every speck of oxidation had to be rubbed with tremendous force until the metal began to burn. This monotonous scraping was the soundtrack of the night kitchen. The dishwashing room, the lowest department in the kitchen, was where those at the bottom of the hierarchy worked. Here, thousands of plates were washed after dinner parties, often without proper soap. Grease was removed with soda and mustard, immersing their hands in murky water for long hours. The skin on their hands became rough, cracked, and covered with non-healing sores from such work. The humidity in this room was so high that the workers' clothes never dried completely. Food scraps that needed to be disposed of or preserved posed a particular problem. In the absence of refrigerators, this required knowledge and effort to preserve food in cold storage rooms. Servants carried heavy barrels and boxes down into deep basements. These constant transitions from the hot kitchen to the icy basement undermined their immunity. Colds and lung diseases were a professional scourge of kitchen staff. The night kitchen also attracted unwanted guests, cockroaches and rats. Pest control was carried out every night because the discovery of an insect by the owners was a disaster. Servants set traps and sealed cracks, trying to protect food supplies. This added to the nervousness of an already stressful job. The fear of punishment for spoiled food was stronger than the fear of rodents. Ventilation in kitchens, often located in basements, was terrible. The smells of smoke, grease, and chemicals lingered, creating a stifling atmosphere. Workers were forced to breathe this cocktail all night long, which led to headaches and fainting spells. Fresh air came in only through narrow windows near the ceiling, which were often kept closed. It was a real oxygen deprivation against the backdrop of hard physical labor. The lighting in the kitchen was dim to save gas or candles. In the dim light, it was easy to cut or burn yourself. which happened regularly. Medical care consisted of applying a dirty rag to the wound, after which work continued. It was impossible to stop because by morning the kitchen had to be ready to prepare breakfast. Every cut was a potential source of infection.
I'll be more careful.
Cleaning tables, cutting meat, and preparing vegetables for the next day were also part of the night shift duties. Huge wooden tables had to be scraped with knives to remove ingrained odors and traces of food. This required considerable physical strength and perseverance. By dawn, the workers' hands were too tired to make fists. By the time the chef came down to the kitchen in the morning, the night shift was exhausted. But for them, the day did not end. It simply flowed smoothly into new duties. They became invisible shadows, handing tools and cleaning up after the senior chefs. This endless conveyor belt of labor ground down human destinies, leaving no hope for change. How many nights do you think you could endure on such a cold stone floor? What you are about to learn is prohibited in 12 countries as a labor law standard, but back then it was the norm. Cleaning chimneys was perhaps the dirtiest and most harmful job in a Victorian home. Every living space in a mansion had a fireplace that was stoked with coal all day long. By morning, before the owners woke up, each of these fireplaces had to be cleaned of ashes and a new load of coal prepared for lighting. This work fell on the shoulders of the youngest maids, who were often called Cinderellas, not because of the fairy tale. The process began with the removal of cooled ashes, which rose into the air in a gray cloud at the slightest movement. To avoid staining furniture and carpets, the space in front of the fireplace was covered with special canvases. The maid had to work almost without breathing so that the soot would not settle on her snow-white cuffs or face. It was precision work with the dirtiest substance in the world. The slightest speck of soot on the carpet could cost the girl her job. But simply removing the ashes was not enough. The cast iron fireplace grate had to be polished to a mirror shine. For this, they used a substance called black lead or graphite paste. This paste was applied with stiff brushes, rubbing it into the metal with great effort. The graphite dust was even finer and more corrosive than coal soot. It penetrated the pores of the skin, turning hands black forever, and clogged the lungs. Polishing a fireplace grate required incredible physical endurance. The girls had to kneel or lie on the floor in uncomfortable positions for hours. The brush strokes had to be quick and rhythmic to create the necessary shine. Their back and arm muscles ached, and their knees swelled from the hard floor. This work was often done in cold rooms where the temperature dropped very low at night. Graphite dust was toxic. Although little thought was given to this at the time, inhaling this substance every night led to chronic coughing and respiratory diseases. Maids often coughed up black phlegm, which was considered normal. By the end of their shift, their faces resembled miners' masks, but in the morning they had to look neat and tidy. This double life was mentally exhausting. After cleaning, the fireplace had to be reassembled so that it would light with a single match. It was an art form, laying the paper, wood chips, and coal correctly. If the fireplace did not light immediately and the room was not warm when the master woke up, the maid was to blame. The ability to create the perfect architecture from coal was highly valued, but mistakes were not forgiven. In large mansions, there could be dozens of fireplaces. This meant that a team of maids moved from room to room in complete silence all night long. They carried heavy buckets of coal and ashes, trying not to make any noise with their tools. This nightly procession resembled a strange ritual, hidden from the eyes of the sleeping inhabitants. Brass or copper fireplace accessories also needed to be polished. Pokers, tongs, and shovels had to shine, reflecting the light of the fire. They were cleaned separately, using the same caustic compounds for metal. The skin on their hands became dry and painful from constant contact with chemicals and abrasives. No creams could save these women's hands. Disposing of ashes was a separate task that required care. They had to be taken out of the house so that the dust did not scatter throughout the corridors. Ashes were often used for household needs, such as in the garden or for cleaning toilets. The waste-free production of a Victorian home was built on the backs of the servants. Every gram of waste passed through their hands. By dawn, when the last fireplace was ready, the maids were covered in a layer of black dust from head to toe. They had to wash themselves in ice-cold water and change into clean uniforms before the bell rang. This transformation from a sooty chimney sweep to a neat maid was a daily miracle, but the health left behind in the fireplace ashes could not be restored. Don't forget to like if you were impressed by this hard work. Guess how much your daily comfort weighs in liters of water? In Victorian homes, plumbing was often only on the lower floors or in the kitchen. However, every morning the owners required a hot bath in their bedrooms on the second or third floor. This meant that at night the water torture began, carrying hundreds of liters of water up the stairs by hand. It was a job that required the strength of a heavyweight and the endurance of a marathon runner. The servants filled huge copper jugs and buckets with hot water heated on the kitchen stove. Each bucket weighed a lot, and they had to be carried without spilling a drop. Wet spots on carpets or parquet floors were unacceptable and strictly punished. Balancing the heavy load, they climbed endless flights of stairs for the servants. The servants' staircases were narrow, steep, and poorly lit. The risk of stumbling and falling with boiling water in their hands was a real threat to their lives. Many suffered serious burns and injuries simply doing their job. But even after a fall, the main fear was not injury, but damage to the owner's property. A broken jug could cost more than a year's salary. Victorian-era bathtubs were deep and required a huge amount of water to fill. A single bath could require up to 10 trips up and down the stairs. If there were several family members and guests in the house, the number of trips could be in the hundreds. It was an endless carousel of buckets, backs, and legs working at their limits. Muscles burned like fire, but there was no stopping. In addition to delivering clean water, there was the problem of removing dirty water. After the morning procedures, the used water had to be scooped out and carried down the same way. Dirty water was heavier and often had an unpleasant smell of soap and body odor. This cycle of climbing up and down turned the servants' morning into an endless physical nightmare. Sewers and bedrooms were rare even in wealthy homes. Portable bathtubs, which were placed directly in front of the fireplaces in the bedrooms, presented a particular challenge. They had to be brought in, set up, filled, and then removed as if they had never been there. Copper or tin bathtubs were heavy and bulky in themselves. Maneuvering them in rooms cluttered with furniture was an art. The slightest scratch on the furniture could lead to a scandal. Water also had to be prepared for wash basins where jugs and basins stood. It had to be at a certain temperature, neither too hot nor too cold. Servants often checked the water with their own hands, burning and chilling their skin. It was a difficult task to satisfy the whims of the masters in terms of water temperature. Mistakes were taken as a personal insult. The physical strain of carrying water led to specific occupational diseases. Hernias, organ prolapse, and chronic back pain were common among maids and footmen. Women's bodies suffered particularly badly from such strain, often leading to infertility. But no one cared about the health of the servants. They were simply replaced with new ones. This work also required perfect timing. The water had to be delivered exactly at the moment of awakening so that it would not cool down. Too early, and the water would cool down. Too late, and the master would have to wait. This time, pressure added stress to an already difficult job. Servants lived by the minute, counting down the time until the next bucket had to be lifted. The water supply system in the house relied solely on human muscle power. Technical progress did not reach the upper floors of mansions for a long time, leaving this area in a legal state. The luxury of a hot bath was paid for with the sweat and health of those who remained behind the scenes. Water was a symbol of purity for some, and a symbol of hard labor for others. Could you lift 50 liters of water to the third floor every morning without an elevator? Night cleaning of living rooms and halls was a real special operation to combat dust. Victorian interiors were overloaded with textiles, heavy velvet curtains, multi-layered carpets, tablecloths with fringes. All these items were real dust collectors that had to be cleaned daily, and this had to be done without vacuum cleaners, using only brushes and damp cloths. Cleaning carpets was a particularly laborious process. To avoid stirring up dust, used tea leaves were used. Wet tea leaves were scattered over the carpet. They absorbed dust and dirt, after which they were carefully swept away with stiff brushes. This required crawling on their knees around the entire perimeter of the huge halls. The smell of old tea and dust permeated the maids' clothes and hair. Upholstered furniture required no less attention. Every crease in the sofa and armchair had to be cleaned with a brush, removing crumbs and lint. The wooden parts of the furniture were polished with beeswax and turpentine to a mirror shine. The smell of turpentine was pungent and caused dizziness, but it was forbidden to air the rooms at night because of the cold and safety concerns. The servants worked in a cloud of chemical fumes. The books in the library required special care. They had to be taken out, wiped down, and dusted, taking care not to damage the bindings. Victorians loved knickknacks, so the shelves were filled with hundreds of porcelain figurines and vases. Each one had to be wiped down without moving it a millimeter from its usual place. It was the work of a sapper, where one awkward movement led to disaster. Parquet floors were scrubbed with special brushes tied to the feet or heavy cast-iron floor polishers. Servants danced their strange dance through the halls, rubbing the floors with wax until they were slippery and shiny. It was a strenuous aerobic exercise that took the last of their strength. Their legs ached from the strain, and their backs ached from the constant bending. Cleaning was carried out in minimal lighting, which forced them to strain their eyes to the limit. Often they had to work literally by touch, relying on their memory of the location of the furniture. The fear of breaking something expensive in the dark was a constant companion of the night shift. Moonlight from the windows was their only aid in this struggle for cleanliness. Dust was removed even from the highest surfaces: cornices, picture frames, and the tops of doors. Long brushes or rickety stepladders were used for this. Falls from heights in the dark were not uncommon, but injuries were kept quiet. The main thing was not to wake the owners with the noise of the fall. Textiles on the walls, silk wallpaper, and tapestries also had to be cleaned with breadcrumbs. The crumbs were rolled over the fabric, collecting soot from gas lamps and fireplaces. It was a slow and painstaking process that required a huge amount of bread and patience. The result was only visible in bright daylight, so they had to work conscientiously at night. By morning, the living rooms had to look as if no human foot had ever set foot in them. The air had to be fresh, the surfaces sparkling, and the order impeccable. This illusion of self-sustaining cleanliness cost an army of people sleepless nights, and none of the guests ever wondered at what cost this comfort came.
Indeed, the room is quite splendid.
After such cleaning, the servants often developed allergies and asthma from constant contact with centuries-old dust. But medical diagnoses were not made at that time, and coughs were attributed to colds. People simply faded away, sacrificing their lungs to velvet curtains and Persian carpets. And all this happened in the complete silence of the sleeping house. What I am about to show you is prohibited in many modern chemical laboratories. Cleaning the family silver was not just a chore, but a sacred ritual with a hint of danger. The silverware was the pride of the family, a symbol of wealth and status. But to make it shine, hours of tedious work and contact with highly dangerous substances were required. At night, when the dining room was empty, the butlers, under the supervision of the steward, took out boxes of forks, spoons, and massive dishes. The main polishing agent was a so-called red powder, which contained iron oxide, but often to enhance the effect and speed of the process, mixtures based on mercury and cyanides were used. These substances gave the metal an incredible shine, but slowly killed those who were. The silver had to reflect the candlelight. Any speck was considered a sign of the servant's needs. The cleaning process was strictly controlled due to food theft. The silver was counted before it was cleaned, and every spoon was accounted for. Servants worked in an atmosphere of mistrust, under constant supervision. This added psychological stress to physical fatigue. Being accused of using a fork or a was rare. In addition to cutlery, candlesticks, trays, and decorative items were also cleaned. Large items required strength to hold and polish at the same time. Hands cramped from repetitive movements, fingers turned black from oxides and chemicals, and it was almost impossible to wash them off. Polishing powder flew through the air, settling on the skin, in the hair, and in the lungs. The taste of metal in the mouth was a constant companion of the footmen. Chronic mercury poisoning led to tremors in the hands, tooth loss, and mental disorders. But hatter's disease was not only characteristic of hatters, but also of those who polished. After polishing, the silver had to be thoroughly rinsed and wiped dry so that no water stains. The polishing cloths were washed and worn separately as they were saturated with poisons. The whole process took most of the night before important receptions. In the morning, the table was set with items that had literally absorbed the health of the servants. The shine of the silver was dazzling, but it hid the dark side of its origin. Behind each shining piece of cutlery were hours of monotonous labor in the dim light. The host saw only their reflection in the spoon, not noticing the shadow of a tired person behind it. Luxury demanded sacrifices, and these sacrifices were made every night. Even storing the silver required effort. It was wrapped in special paper or cloth, impregnated with chemicals to prevent tarnishing. Unwrapping and refolding this arsenal was a separate procedure. The footmen became guardians of treasures that never belonged to them. By morning, their eyes were watering from the strain and chemical dust. But at breakfast, the footman had to stand with his back straight and his face impassive. Hands trembling from poisoning were hidden behind white gloves. Do you know what chemicals are in your household chemicals? Laundry in the Victorian era was a marathon that lasted several days, but the most difficult stages often took place at night or early in the morning. A huge amount of bed linen, tablecloths, towels, and personal clothing required constant processing. The laundry room was usually located in a separate wing or basement where steam, dampness, and suffocating heat reigned. The women who worked there were called laundresses, and their work was considered one of the hardest jobs.
Just keep scrubbing, Maggie.
The process began with soaking the laundry in huge vats of lye. The laundry had to be sorted, rubbed, and beaten with wooden rollers. Wet laundry weighed an incredible amount, and it had to be turned over with long wooden tongs in boiling water. The steam obscured their vision, made it difficult to breathe, and created a sauna effect. The laundress's clothes were instantly soaked with sweat and condensation. The laundry was boiled in huge copper cauldrons, under which the fire had to be constantly maintained. The smoke from the stoves mixed with the steam, creating an unbearable atmosphere. The women worked with red faces, suffocating from the lack of air. They stood on the wet stone floor in wooden shoes to protect their feet as best they could. Dangerous substances, such as bleach and blue, were used for bleaching. These chemicals corroded their hands, causing chemical burns and eczema. The laundress's skin was white, wrinkled, and constantly inflamed. Contact with hot alkaline water destroyed the skin's natural defenses. Rubber gloves did not exist at that time. Laundry was wrung out by hand or with primitive mechanical rollers. Turning the handle of a heavy press to wring out sheets was exhausting work. It required male strength, but women did the job. The risk of pinching fingers or getting an arm caught in the rollers was very high. Injuries in laundries were common. Drying laundry in the English climate was a constant headache. In wet weather, laundry was hung in special drying rooms where stoves were heated to high temperatures. The temperature differences between the hot dryer and the cold yard were detrimental to health. Rheumatism and tuberculosis decimated the ranks of laundresses faster than anywhere else. Night washing was necessary to provide fresh laundry by morning. Laundry workers often worked around the clock, interrupting only for a short sleep right on top of piles of dirty clothes. They had no clear schedule, only the amount of work to be done. The mountains of dirty laundry seemed endless, renewing themselves every day. Ironing was a separate circle of hell. Heavy cast iron irons were heated on the stove, and their temperature was checked by holding them to the cheek or spitting on the sole. The irons cooled quickly, so they had to be changed constantly. The iron could weigh several kilograms, and you had to swing it for hours. The muscles in your arms would stiffen from the strain. Starching collars and cuffs required special skill. The starch had to be of a certain thickness so that the fabric would hold its shape but not be cardboard-like. The hot starch burned the fingers, but the result had to be perfect. A gentleman's perfectly white, crisp shirt was the result of the laundress's hellish labor. These women were invisible even among the servants, often isolated in their steamy realm. Their work was the most physically demanding, and their pay was among the lowest. The cleanliness of Victorian clothing was paid for with their health and lives. Shoe cleaning may seem like a minor detail, but not in a Victorian mansion. In a house where a large family and many guests lived, the number of pairs of shoes could be counted in the dozens. Each member of the family changed their shoes several times a day. Shoes for breakfast, for walking, for horse riding, for dinner. This mountain of leather fell on the shoulders of the busboy, the boy who cleaned shoes, or the junior footman. Dirty boots from the street brought in kilograms of clay, manure, and street dirt. First, this dirt had to be scraped off with stiff brushes and knives, taking care not to scratch the leather. The dried clay created clouds of dust that had to be breathed in the cramped shoe cleaning room. This work was usually done in the basement or rear annex in dim light. After cleaning, the polishing process began. The wax of that time was made from soot, wax, fat, and often had toxic components added for shine. The smell of the wax was sharp and pungent. It was rubbed into the leather with hands or rags until the surface became mirror-like. The black dye penetrated the skin of the hands so deeply that it was impossible to wash off. Patent leather shoes and ladies' light-colored shoes required special attention. Special compounds were used for them, often containing acids or bleaches. The slightest speck on a satin shoe could ruin the mood of the owner and the life of the servant. It was the work of a restorer, performed every night on an industrial scale. Leather shoes of that era were stiff and heavy. To keep them from losing their shape, special wooden blocks were inserted inside. Removing and inserting these tight struts required considerable effort from the fingers. By morning, the hands ached and the fingers were covered with calluses and abrasions. The number of shoes increased during the hunting season or balls. Then the night shift turned into an endless marathon. Hundreds of boots lined up in rows waiting for their turn. A servant could spend the whole night bent over shoes, inhaling solvent fumes. His back was bent, his eyes were glued shut, but every pair had to be perfect. In addition to the master's shoes, the shoes of the senior servants also had to be looked after. The butler and housekeeper also demanded that their boots be perfectly polished. The hierarchy of exploitation extended to the very bottom, and the shoe shine boy was the last link in this chain. He got the most work and the least gratitude. If a scratch or a dull spot was found on the master's boot in the morning, punishment was inevitable. Shoes were an indicator of a gentleman's status, his calling card. Therefore, the responsibility for the shine of the boots was enormous. A mistake could cost him his job, and thus his livelihood. Sometimes the shoes also had to be dried if the masters got caught in the rain. This had to be done carefully so that the leather did not crack from the heat of the fireplace. Over-dried shoes were ruined, and under-dried shoes caused the master to catch a cold. This balance required experience and constant attention. By dawn, rows of shiny shoes stood in the dressing rooms, ready for a new day. Their invisible creator collapsed from exhaustion, washing the black wax off his hands. And the owners, putting on warm, soft boots, did not even think about whose hands had touched their soles all night. While the owners slept peacefully in their warm beds, their clothes began to prepare for a new outing. Valets and personal maids spent sleepless nights bringing the complex wardrobe to perfect condition. This involved not only mundane washing, but also a multi-step process of dry cleaning, steaming, and minor repairs. Victorian clothing was incredibly complex, multi-layered, and expensive, so caring for it was a real science. Servants had to be chemists, tailors, and strategists all at once to ensure that their masters looked impeccable the next morning. Heavy wool suits, tailcoats, and coats could not be washed in water as they would lose their shape. They were cleaned for hours with stiff brushes, removing street dust, dirt from carriages, and dried mud from the hems. Every stain, even the smallest one from greasy sauce or red wine, had to be removed immediately. To do this, they used caustic solutions, and the pungent smell of ammonia and gasoline lingered in the servants' quarters all night. It was dangerous chemistry bordering on art, because one wrong move could ruin fabric worth a servant's annual salary. One of the most unique and strange nighttime tasks was the mandatory ironing of the morning newspapers. Yes, you heard right. Every morning, the press was carefully ironed with a hot iron before being served at the table. This was not done for aesthetic reasons, but to set the fresh printing ink with heat. This ensured that the ink would not stain the gentleman's snow-white gloves or manicured hands at breakfast. In addition, a warm and crisp newspaper was considered a sign of the highest domestic comfort and care. This seemingly absurd and useless procedure took away precious sleep time from tired servants, but it could not be neglected as the master's dirty fingers could lead to dismissal. Clothing repairs, professionally known as invisible darning, were carried out by the flickering light of a candle stub or a dim lamp. Maids had to sew up accidental tears in the finest lace or expensive silk with jeweler's precision. The task was to make the repair completely invisible to the naked eye, even in bright sunlight. This required incredible visual strain, as it was necessary to restore the weave of the fabric. Because of this work in dim light, many girls were practically blind by the age of 30 or suffered from severe migraines. Preparing a lady's wardrobe included a thorough check of the strength of all ribbons, hooks, and hidden buttons. Elaborate evening dresses with heavy crinolines and stiff corsets had hundreds of small fastening details. If even one hook came off during dressing, or, God forbid, at a ball, it would provoke the terrible wrath of the hostess. An embarrassment with clothing could cause gossip throughout high society. Therefore, at night, a complete and meticulous inspection of every square centimeter of expensive fabric was carried out. Men's snow-white shirts, piqué vests, and silk ties also required the closest attention of the valet. Starch collars had to be stiff as cardboard to keep their shape, but at the same time perfectly smooth. The slightest unevenness or burr on the fabric could rub a gentleman's neck raw, which was unacceptable. The selection of the right cufflinks, tie pins, and other accessories also fell entirely on the shoulders of the servant. He had to anticipate his master's wishes and prepare the perfect set for the occasion. Shoes, gloves, canes, and hats. All of this had to be laid out in a strict strategic order. In the morning, the master's dressing had to go without a single hitch or unnecessary movement. This required not only physical labor, but also serious time planning. The servant had to know his master's schedule better than he did himself, anticipating the change of outfits throughout the long day. Servants often had to wait until late at night for their masters to return from late balls, theaters, or private clubs. They were not allowed to go to bed until their masters had returned home and were completely undressed and put to bed. Assistance in unlacing a complex corset or removing narrow high boots was an essential part of the service. A tired or intoxicated master was physically unable to do this on his own. Only after the lights went out in the master's bedroom could the servant finally begin to tidy up the removed clothing. This time of endless waiting and a half-sleep in the cold corridor was the most painful ordeal. Fighting sleepy eyes while sitting on a hard wooden chair in silence was a real torture. But it was impossible to fall asleep completely, as the doorbell could ring at any second. The life of a servant was completely subject to someone else's rhythm, mercilessly erasing the boundaries between day and night. By early morning, when the wardrobe was finally ready and the clean clothes were neatly laid out, the servants had only a couple of hours left. This was all the time they had to rest before the house woke up and the new day's work began. Their eyes were constantly red from strain and lack of sleep, and their fingers were pricked by needles until they bled. But it was their invisible and grueling night work that kept up the outward gloss of glittering Victorian society. The most paradoxical thing about the night shift was that it did not end with rest. On the contrary, it flowed smoothly into the start of a new working day. Around 4 to 5 a.m., when the main night cleaning was completed, preparations for waking up the house began. This transition was the most physically and psychologically difficult moment of the day. The body, exhausted by a sleepless night, demanded to be shut down, but it was precisely at this moment that the pace had to be quickened. In the kitchen, they began to bake fresh bread and rolls for breakfast. The smell of baking, which we associate with comfort, was a signal for the servants that it was time to start another round of work. The dough was kneaded by hand, requiring enormous physical effort from tired hands. The heat from the ovens filled the kitchen again, replacing the nighttime cold. In the dining room, the table was set, with each piece of cutlery aligned with a ruler. The tablecloth had to be dazzlingly white, without a single crease. The footmen moved silently, arranging the fragile porcelain. One awkward movement due to fatigue could lead to broken dishes and disaster. Concentration had to be at its peak in these pre-dawn hours. The servants responsible for heating made their final rounds, checking that the fireplaces in all the rooms were lit. The house had to greet its awakening owners with warmth. If it was cold anywhere, the culprit would face a severe reprimand. The temperature regime was the holy grail of comfort. At the same time, the shutters and curtains on the lower floors were opened, letting in the gray morning light. For the servants, this light meant that their invisible time was over. Now they had to be neat, alert, and ready to carry out orders in full view of their masters. There should be no signs of fatigue on their faces. The servants' morning toilet was rushed in ice-cold water to wake them up. They had to look impeccable in their uniforms, even though they had only slept for a couple of hours. The appearance of the servants was part of the image of the house, and sloppiness was not allowed. The first ringing of the bells from the master's bedroom sounded like a starting gun. The rush began with trays of tea, hot water, and newspapers. The entire mechanism of the house, lubricated by sweat and sleepless nights, was running at full capacity. The owners woke up in a perfectly clean, warm house, where their clothes had been cleaned and breakfast was ready. This endless cycle without normal sleep and rest meant that the servants lived in a state of altered consciousness. Chronic fatigue became second nature to them. They worked on autopilot, often not remembering how the day had gone. Young girls and boys quickly lost their health, turning into old people by the age of 40. Night work was the foundation on which all the luxury of the Victorian era stood. Without this hidden labor, the mansions would instantly become overgrown with dirt, and comfort would disappear. It was the price of civilization paid by those who had no voice. When the sun rose over the estate, a new day began for the world. For the servants, however, it was just a continuation of an endless shift in which night and day merged into one gray strip of labor, and so it went on, day after day, year after year, as long as they had the strength. We saw that behind the facade of Victorian prosperity and order lay the dark, exhausting reality of night labor. The ideal life we admire in films and books was built on the health and lives of thousands of invisible people. Their knees were rubbed raw on stone, their lungs clogged with soot, and their eyes blinded in the dim light so that the aristocracy could enjoy cleanliness and comfort. It was a system that squeezed every last drop out of a person and discarded them like a broken tool. The history of night servants forces us to take a fresh look at the price of luxury and human dignity. Today, we complain about working from 9 to 6, but for a Victorian servant, such a schedule would have seemed like heaven on earth. Do you think modern people could endure even 1 week in the rhythm of Victorian servants? Or have we become too spoiled by comfort? Suggest topics for future videos about life in the past that you would like to see in the comments. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new dives into history.